Hi, and welcome to the history lessons in Edupedia World. Continuing with how life was for ancient Romans, today we're going to go into what entertainment they had. Previously, we've had a look at the structure of a town, public services, where people lived. Today, we're going to go into what they did for fun. So, where would you go on the equivalent of a Saturday night or Saturday evening in ancient Roman times? Well, you did have various options depending on what was on. There are three main places where you would go to watch some show and for fun. So we're going to see theatre, the amphitheatre, and the circus. Some of them did share the same type of celebrations and shows, we would say, but each of them had something specific. Not all towns had all three, basically only big, large, important places. But if you wanted to look good, you could also build smaller ones. And you would always have at least one of them to keep the population entertained. But let's go into it, and we start with the that art that has survived, that we still have theatres nowadays, and still people in many places use these ancient theatres. This was the place where comedies and tragedies were held. It was the place to make you laugh or weep and just forget about your troubles. Well, some examples of the genre were mainly from Greek mythology, others would depict episodes from Roman history. You had various themes. The most popular form of the entertainment in theatre was actually mime for Romans. A mime was a typical comic production with more of a sensationalist plot and some sexual innuendos. Also, it was normally inspired by aspects and incidents of everyday life that they just exaggerated and put into comedy. And they usually just lasted for a short time. In this case, you've probably seen actors used masks, and as a rule, some women were also admitted for performances. They could perform in theatre, but women were usually not admitted in theatres, at least at the start. Then we have pantomime. Pantomime for Romans were performances made by solo dancers. It's not panto for any Brits here. It's not what you watch normally during Christmas time. Pantomime here was solo dancers with a choir that accompanied them, and the stories were normally just tragic myths. As we well know, theatre does come from the Greek world. It's something that Romans imported and they improved. But look at the inclination of the terrain in Greek theatres. They used the terrain's natural inclination to build these amazing theatres. But Romans decided that they didn't want to wait for or look for the perfect place, and they didn't have the patience for it, they built the theatres with the whole architectural structure. Yes, Greek versus Roman. They did much more work, and they had to imitate the Greek structure, the Greek buildings. Well, what parts do we have in a theatre? Well, we have where the spectators would sit, that is the cavea. You'd have all this semicircular area where people would sit, and depending on the place, you would have special seats for important people. These things never change. Then you had the orchestra. This was the place for the choir and musicians that helped act the play. And lastly, this one's easy, this is a scena. The scena here is obviously where the play was performed. And you normally had various buildings behind that would help people have a background and have a bit of something where the actors could play with. It would look like buildings. Now, just to see a couple of examples. Yes, these examples are, wait for it, from Pompeii. In Pompeii, there are two theatres. The first one we're looking at now is the small theatre. This one was established in the 1st century BC and is one of the most well-balanced examples of architecture in this type of building. It could hold up to only 1,000 spectators, and normally would be covered in case of rain or sun. It does show more a typical design of Greek theatre because it's quite new. They were still developing the craft of building the theatres from scratch. And so this one is on a natural slope. Here you would normally have musical events and the mime performances we just talked about before. Then another example here, it's more typical of what we find around the world. This is a large theatre. This magnificent building was built in the 2nd century BC, and the stage area had many conversions. It also keeps to the Greek structure because they had luckily natural inclination and they could choose the place. During performances, this one could also be covered, but it wasn't well equipped. It's too large. The capacity is bigger. You would have 5,000 spectators in here, and you would tend to have more the comedies and the tragedies. You had more space, and the scena, where the performers would be, was larger. Also, a very special feature of this theatre, as you can see in the photograph, was the natural background that you would have, that they would use as scenery. This is the panoramic view of the mountains behind Pompeii. One of the reasons why so many people moved to Pompeii, because of the scenery. So they actually used it. And this is basically two quick examples of Roman theatres. It doesn't have much mystery if we're just going on the basic idea of it. And now let's go to one of the most, or the best known Roman buildings for spectacles, shows, entertainment, the amphitheatre. This one is the amphitheatre, obviously in Pompeii, for you to have an idea of how well conserved it is. We'll have to say though that Roman amphitheatres should not be confused with theatres. Amphitheatres are full ovals like any sporting stadium, and we've seen in the previous slides that theatres were semicircular with obviously a theatrical style stage for the plays and performances. Here you have an arena, just a space in the middle that everyone around can watch. It was also, well, you could do plays and performances here, even up to fights that we'll see, but up to mock naval battles. Really strange shows have been put in amphitheatres. The majority, though, of these buildings were started during imperial times and used to keep people happy, as we'll see. Many emperors would elaborate games and stage gladiator fights to secure their power, actually. The large Roman amphitheatres, for you to have an idea, could hold around 20,000 people, average. And the oldest amphitheatre known is the one in Pompeii that was built shortly after 70 BC. So this is one of the oldest ones we have record of. And as we've said, then during the imperial time they would flourish. You would find them everywhere. And they were obviously built all over the empire, because this actually aided the Romanization of the people. You would give them all the shows and entertainment and make them happy and make them forget that they had been conquered. Also, it became a symbol of status for the city. So if you could build a big monumental multi-story amphitheatre, you were amazing. And you would highly decorate it with marble, precious stone, really well done, and decorated with statues and art. Amphitheatres were pompous, especially if the emperor had the need to keep people happy and show his power through this. But let's look at the structure of it. As you can see, big, round, like a stadium, more oval-like than round, but it depends. So we have first here is the cavea, as we've seen before. These are concentric rows where people would sit down, and they are all supported by arches that were built into the framework, or sometimes, if it's the ancient ones, built just digging out the hillside and using the excavated material for building the fighting area. Well, the cavea is traditionally organized in various sections. You have this first section, just really close to the arena, that's called the Imma. Here it was normally reserved for, yes, people with money in the higher and wealthier parts of society. They would have more direct access to what was happening in the arena. Then, for most people, you would have the media cavea, just general public and basically men. Then, on this top part where you don't have that much space would be the summa cavea, where women and children and poor people that could want to go here would have to sit. Women were quite frowned upon, especially in the early ages, to go into this kind of places. Then you have the podium, where you would keep some really special seats for maybe the emperor, or depending on the place, or the local person in charge. Obviously then we have the arena where everything happened, and under the arena, this is quite interesting, you had the fossa bestiaria. Here is where you would have cells and rooms where you would keep animals, the gladiators, everyone that then would go into the arena. You would keep them closed in this confined space that was underneath, actually. And lastly, we have to mention the Vomitoria. These are the various accesses that you had to the building and the seating. It's just like a modern football stadium. They had lots of vomitoria, as you can see, adapted and ready to get people in and people out, because they could have really large numbers of people here. Also, it's marked here in this salmon color. At the top, you would have, in some cases, the sticks would support a cover for the seats. So if it was too hot and sunny, they would have shade. Or if it rained, it was really sophisticated and ready. The most famous one, obviously, is the Colosseum. This is the example that we're going to see of an amphitheatre. It is in Rome. It's one of the most known symbols of Rome, built of concrete and sand. It did have pieces of marble stuck to it, but during medieval times they were taken off. The Colosseum could hold, it's estimated, this is amazing, between 50,000 and 80,000 people. And normally it would have an average audience of 65,000. It's enormous. They did need those vomitoria, those spaces, to go in and go out from the large numbers of people. Its original name, actually, in Latin, was Amphitheatrum Flavium, as it was built during the Flavian dynasty after Nero. But it was normally in Roman times called Amphitheatrum Caesium for the Caesar, and the name Colosseum was later. It derived from a colossal statue of Nero that was nearby, actually. And as time changed, it's just a name that stuck. Afterwards, when the empire fell, this area was actually used by the church. They built a church inside, the Christian church, obviously, Catholic church, and they had a little monastery inside the Colosseum. It was also used, the arena, as a cemetery during some time. So it was, afterwards, they did not leave it just to rot. And yes, what did you do, or what did you go and see in the Colosseum? Well, gladiator games, most known. You would have gladiators fighting each other. You would have gladiators fighting beasts from North Africa normally. You could even have beasts fighting beasts. And the also well-known executions, and in this case, Christian massive executions, where they would just throw the people into the arena and let go all these wild animals that they hadn't fed for days and days, and they were famished, and that they also tortured beforehand, probably just to make them wilder. As I've said, sometimes one of the most curious things is that they actually flooded the arena and had naval fights in the Colosseum. This wasn't common because it was really difficult to bring all the water into the Colosseum and keep it there, but it was done more than once. And just to end this, we have to mention the circus. It's a completely different thing from the clowny lion circus that we have nowadays. Circuses were venues for chariot races and horse races, where you would bet. And also sometimes for performances for important events. Normally the chariot racing were teams that represented different groups, normally different financial backers, and competed against really skilled drivers. This was a big profession. The teams sometimes would be a focus of such intense support that many disturbances broke around different races, and spectators had to be controlled. Big bets were done here, and as modern days, you would follow the races and always normally stick to one team. This was really dangerous both for the driver and the horse. They frequently suffered serious injuries and even death. Falling off the horse or having one of your wheels break would mean that the rest would run on you and you were done. This sounds gory, but spectators actually loved it. The most famous one, also, hey, women could go and watch it. This is one of the exceptions. And yes, the most famous circus is Circus Maximus in, Rome, with 6,621 meters, that's 2,037 feet in length, and 118 meters, 387 feet in width, having the capacity for around 150,000 people. This was enormous. All the people that were going there to bet on certain teams. Seriously, lots of things haven't really changed. Quickly to go through the parts. This was obviously the arena. You had the meta. This was one of the ends of the spina. Yes, these were various ornate columns, statues and obelisks that you had in the middle to separate the racing area. Then you had the gradus, where people sat, same organization as the rest. You would have an imperial lodge if it was needed, especially in Rome, and a triumphal gate where you would go in and out, especially if you won. So we see that they had this aspect to them, Romans betting on races. And here, just to end this lesson, there's the Panem et Circenses bread and circus. I'm sure you've heard about it. This comes from a satire of Juvenal. I won't read it, you can have a look at it. This phrase is usually used to describe the generation of public approval through easy diversion and distraction. That is what Roman emperors did. They prepared circus and gladiator shows so people would be distracted and not worry about things that were going wrong. Doing these big acts, they would also give free bread. There you have the bread and circus. And it's still used nowadays in many, many languages. And sadly, it still happens in many or most societies that we're given just some shows, something to keep entertained and not think about what is happening. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson and see you in the next.